Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. We're taking your calls at 855-236-3228, 855-236-3228. Trevor in Delaware, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Trevor.
Hey, Ben. Hi from Delaware. Just wanted to say I'm a really big fan, and I'm a data analyst for a company that Elizabeth Warren can't stand, so I really appreciate your kind of data-driven approach to kind of tackling a lot of the political issues of the day. So my question is, at this point, is it worth it? I'm really not a fan of doing business based on politics. I think it should be separate. But is it worth it at this point to organize some sort of counter boycott against businesses that give in to the left's demands to censor free speech, like on Facebook? I mean, it's kind of one of those things where how long? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that, as I've discussed before, what we basically have on our hands is a prisoner's dilemma. So the worst case scenario is what is happening right now, which is that the left boycotts companies and pushes them to basically become leftist mouthpieces, and the right does nothing. And the best case scenario would be everybody leaves everybody alone, but that's not happening. And the second worst case scenario is probably that we all boycott everybody, because at least maybe there's the possibility that with mutually assured destruction, corporations either learn that these boycotts are ineffective, or corporations simply cave to everybody, and then we have counter corporations that are right-wing in nature. I think the latter is probably the most likely to happen. I think that there will be a right-wing coffee company like Black Rifle Coffee, and there will be a left-wing coffee company like Starbucks. I think there will be a right-wing razor company and a left-wing razor company. I think that what will end up happening is the complete fragmentation of our corporate culture because of corporate cowardice. But I agree with you. Listen, I used to run a group called Truth Revolt. We explicitly said at Truth Revolt that we were the anti-Media Matters, and our goal was to go after advertisers and use exactly Media Matters' tactics on the left in the same way they used it on the right. So we went after Al Sharpton, for example. We went after his advertisers, and we asked them to cancel their advertisements based on the fact that Al Sharpton is a grifter, and not only a grifter, a race baiter who's been involved in not one but two race riots, right? And we got a couple of advertisers to cancel. We were responsible probably for Alec Baldwin being kicked off the air, because after Alec Baldwin used an anti-gay slur, we went to advertisers and said, do you want to be on Alec Baldwin? We said openly, we don't want to do any of this. We said openly, we're not interested in doing any of this. But the left does this all the time. And so either corporations are going to learn to inure themselves to the advances of predatory interest groups, or we are going to make it impossible for the left to operate. Either everybody gets to operate in a free reign, in a free space of ideas where corporations are not targeted, or nobody does. And I think that we're quickly reaching that point, because right now the left is clever. They're not just going after advertisers on right-wing programs. They're going after the social media companies. I mean, what's happening right now, where you have companies basically pulling their cash from entire social media platforms to get the social media platforms to change their rules such that people who disagree with the left are branded racist and kicked off the platform. So far, the social media companies have been fairly careful about who they have kicked off. And I don't think they've been completely careful. I think there's some really egregious cases. They kicked off a feminist named Megan Murphy for suggesting that men are not women. And that's been happening on Twitter more and more often. But overall, they've basically been picking outlier cases where it's very difficult to defend the person. I think over time, the left is going to push more and more. It'll be people like me and Mark Levin and Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh on the chopping block, right? That'll be the goal. And they won't be going after talk radio. They will be going after the social media platforms. They'll be suggesting that social media platforms ban people like you for having your viewpoint. So if corporations don't feel the pressure from the right, like if you go along with this, then you're going to lose the other half of your constituency. Then they're just going to cave to the left, because they always understand the right is going to be good, and they're going to not provide any sort of real ramification for the corporation swinging left. Like, we're not going to boycott Nike per se, but the left will boycott. The left will be loud, and so just as a matter of due course, they will move on. They will move in that direction. So I agree with you. I agree with you, Trevor. I mean, we may be in that place at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I hope we don't get to the point where it's fragmented like that, but at this point, I'm not sure if there's an alternative. Hopefully. Yeah,
I'm not sure it's avoidable either. It's sad. It's sad. It shouldn't be like this. I mean, it's gotten to the point where, as I've said before, I got ripped online for this, what I thought was a pretty obvious point, which is if you have a sports league that is pushing only one side of a political message, and then you have another sports league that is pushing a completely different side, you might end up with fragmented audiences. But if you have a sport that says, we're a sport that honors the American flag and the cops, that's going to be one group of people. And then there's going to be a sport that paints Black Lives Matter on the side of the court, not just because everyone in America believes Black Lives Matter, but because the implication is that there are a bunch of Americans who are deeply racist and that the system itself is racist, and it makes a broader argument. right? And that's going to fragment viewership. So I guess that's the way we're going as a country, and that means that we will be culturally poles apart. Trevor, appreciate the call. Summer in Prince George, Virginia. Go for it, Summer.
Hi. I had a question. So my cousin is a gay liberal, and as far as I know, he's always voted on that side of the spectrum. I'm a conservative. We have a very open relationship and conversation. Both of us respect each other's ideas, but we often don't agree on things for the most part. Something we do agree on are the recent riots and protests. We don't agree with them and how they're being carried out, the looting, the burning of buildings, so on and so forth. I do want to talk to my cousin about voting, this year when it comes to the president. And I know he plans on voting for Biden. How would I approach, in your opinion, the conversation to kind of sway him to vote for Trump, even though I know he very much dislikes the president and a lot of his policies? I feel if he votes for Biden, he is going to be voting for these protesters. He's going to be voting for the demands that they are making. And this is something he has told me he clearly does not want. So how do you think I should approach the conversation in trying to convince him that if he does vote for Biden, he is voting for these radical views?
I think that you have to point, this is the problem with Biden. You have to point to politicians other than Biden. So Biden did condemn the rioting and the looting. He did it 3 days later. Right? He's late and he's slow, and he doesn't really fight against any of this stuff, but he gives the impression of somebody who is not per se going to stand for the looting and the rioting. You can point out that the Obama administration did. I mean, they did stand for the looting and the rioting, and they kind of rooted for it in Ferguson and Washington, D.C. But it's hard to say, it's hard to paint Joe Biden as a super threatening guy who's fine with rioting and looting when he occasionally says a thing and also doesn't appear particularly threatening. So that is an inherent problem. You'd be much better off if the candidate were like Bernie Sanders, because Bernie would be out there like actually leading the erection of guillotines at Jeff Bezos' property. It would be better for Trump if you were running against somebody like a Kamala Harris, who has expressed that this is just sort of the outrage of the moment, and that looting and rioting are an expression of legitimate American outrage about the racism of the system. Because Biden is not alive, it's very difficult to say to people Biden is dangerous. The two messages are in conflict, right? Trump has been trying to push two. One is Biden is senile, and the other is Biden is a threat to your freedoms. They are actually both true, right? He is senile, and because he is senile, he is not going to be running the party. But that's a hard message to push. All I can say is that the Democratic Party overall has been a lot more tolerant. I mean, Jenny Durkin is a perfect example. Very, very tolerant of an actual quasi-terror state set up in the middle of Seattle, and she's just been sitting on it for weeks. So saying that Biden, would be much more like Jenny Durkin than he is likely to be like any of the Republican governors who prohibit this sort of stuff, that seems fairly commonsensical. Now, whether your cousin goes for it or not is another story, but it's Biden makes it difficult. Biden's a tough candidate, and he's a tough candidate specifically because he is so kind of inoffensive, Uncle Joe, not radical, he's not making huge mistakes. He's not. He's actually running a pretty good campaign. I mean, all the circumstances have also collided to make this an easy campaign for him, because if he were forced to be out on the road all the time, I'm not sure that he could stand it. Like, it's as though God basically said, how could I create an ideal campaign for Joe Biden? I know I'll restrict everyone in America to their basements, so it doesn't look weird when he's just sitting in his basement. And also, I will make it so that he only has to speak once every 4 days. And also, he only has to make the most anodyne statements about the most commonsensical things ever, like don't rip down a statue of George Washington, and he will appear to be moderate.
Right. Well, I do worry, too, whoever he picks as his vice president,
Yep.
I do feel like there's going to be a point in time where that person takes over the presidency, because Joe Biden will eventually go brain dead or just will be totally incompetent and can't make decisions. So I worry if he picks somebody that's very radical and believes in this new movement that's going on, that they will in turn go ahead and make policies and laws based off of the demands of these crazy rioters.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's right. I think that you're almost going to have to wait until he selects a VP, because once he selects a VP, then that is going to be a target, right? If it's Elizabeth Warren, for example, there's a lot to attack about Elizabeth Warren. If it's Kamala Harris, there's a lot to attack about Kamala Harris. If it's Joe Biden, you are almost literally beating a dead horse. And and so there's not much you can do there. I appreciate the call, Summer, and hang in there. Take more of your calls in just a moment. 855-236-3228. Mason in Washington, D.C., you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Mason.
Hey Ben, how are you doing? I'm really excited to speak to you. So a quick question for you. So like as a Jewish person myself, I have not. It's funny, and I know you've talked a little bit before, but it's like we constantly move back and forth of ethnicity, race, religion, and it's like we're white whenever good things happen, whenever bad things happen. Now all of a sudden we're a minority. How do we? And I find myself now even to get a seat at the table, I have to even say I'm a person of color. I mean, I'm checking other and putting Jewish now in boxes just to feel like how do you think this is dangerous, good? How do you think we move forward with this? Do you think we should identify as a race? What's your opinion on that?
So Jews are both a race and they're really an ethnicity and a religion. The one I care about is the religious aspect of it, because frankly, I don't care about whether you have a Jewish ancestor or not. Typical the only reason, the only reason that matters in any real way for Judaism is because it's a matrilineal descent religion. So you don't have to convert in if your mom was Jewish, right? If your mom was Jewish, then you're already assumed to be Jewish, and that's just the way that the descent works. But the idea that this confers some sort of Jewish knowledge is a great irritant to me, and it's one of my chief bugaboos, right? I really, really despise when you'll see Jews who have a Jewish mom or Jewish parents, and then they will hate Israel, they'll hate the Torah, they'll hate religion, they'll hate all of that stuff. Leftism is their religion. They'll be like, but as a Jew, and it's like, well, you have, no, I'm sorry, nope. That is not how any of that works. Now, as far as the idea that Jews are viewed as a race, on the intersectional hierarchy, the answer there is yes, because Jews have been treated as an outsider group on the basis of ethnicity before. So Jews have been treated as a group in the United States. They were banned from higher education in many areas of the United States throughout the 1920s and 1930s. There were signs in stores in the United States saying no Jews allowed. That existed in the 1920s and the 1930s. In the United States, there was widespread discrimination against Jews. Not the only ethnic group, right? I mean, in the early 20th century, there were signs saying no Irish for some people. But Jews had it a lot later and a lot more harshly in the United States than the Irish did as a general matter. So if you're talking about just victimized groups in world history, Jews are a victimized group in world history. So it depends on the purpose of the conversation. If the purpose of the conversation is, does your Judaism matter? Then the religious aspect matters. If the purpose of the conversation is, were you labeled a Jew for purposes of discussing whether you are part of a victimized group? Yes, Jews are the single most victimized group in America in terms of hate crimes on a per capita basis, and it is not particularly close. So it matters in that sense. So both of those senses matter. The left has decided that Jews are not a victimized group because Jews are disproportionately successful economically speaking. So it doesn't matter they're the number one targets of hate crimes. It doesn't matter they experience disproportionate hatred against them as a group. They don't count because they are well-educated and earn a lot of money in the United States. That's not, by the way, exclusive to Jews. You see this with Asian Americans too. Asian Americans are now in the white category. Wesley Yang discusses this in his book, The Souls of Yellow Folk. He's a New York Times bestselling author. His book, he talks specifically about the idea that Asians are now considered sort of white because they were a quote-unquote model minority. So really what the left does is they create a hierarchy of victimhood, and victimhood can be gauged by just how much your economic indicators lag by group, right? Instead of looking at you as an individual. That's the way the left does it. So if we're going to look by group, then Jews are a victimized group, historically speaking. But I would never say that the Jews are victims of systemic anti-Semitism in the United States today, because that's an insane contention.
So, and I agree with you on a lot of that stuff, but I never found myself even looking at my own self in part of his own group. I just thought that was, whatever, until the left started putting us all into, or more so, I would say, into these little groups. So do we continue? Do I continue, or do the Jewish people continue to identify as a group, or do we just break out of it and just not, we're not going to confine to these groups?
I think that, again, identifying as religiously Jewish is the one that I care about. But identifying as a member of a racial group is really, I think, generally pointless unless it has a religious connotation. But again, if you're identifying as my mom is Jewish, therefore I don't have to convert, that is a different thing than I'm identifying as Jewish, therefore grant me special favors as a Jew. Like that I don't tend to agree with. So I appreciate the call, Mason. We'll take more of your calls in a moment at 855-236-3228, 855-236-3228. You're listening to The Ben Shapiro Show. This video is sponsored by Blinksale. It is the revolutionary invoicing software for small businesses. Spend less time billing, more time making the money with Blinksale. Go down to the link in our description and give it a click.